And boom, according to that, I am live. I'm trying a different setup tonight, mainly because it's been weeks and I haven't really, I mean, as much as I could flip through topics like I always do, I don't have any set up at the moment. And I figure that the topics pretty much speak for themselves. There are two big things happen. Well, I guess three things to talk about today. First of all, where I've been for the last 3 weeks and my sort of adventures in terms of traveling and coming back to Japan and getting home, and maybe the situation with coronavirus I should maybe mention. But it was also eye-opening for me, the whole thing about leaving Japan and coming back into Japan. That's the first thing to talk about. Second thing, of course, is the assassination of Shinzo Abe the other day, and how that affects the election, the upper house election that's happening. Basically, it's a half-chamber election that's happening at the moment, and yeah, how I think that will affect that. So, you know, three pretty big topics to talk about. Plus, it's just been a long time, right? And I do like hanging out. So yeah, I think I'll keep it sort of low key. And so I created this new screen layout, which basically has me bigger than usual. Hopefully, I'm not scaring anyone away with that. But yeah, great to see we've got so many people rocking in here already. It is a thing with this live streaming thing that particularly if you go for 2 or 3 weeks, like, even 1 week, numbers drop off. I obviously don't obsess over the numbers, but yeah, I do worry that people might, fall out of the habit of keeping me company. So it is nice to see so many people already back in here. You can hear my throat is still. I had tonsillitis last week. That was part of the drama of me not being home or able to do the show. Still got a bit of the throat being a bit raspy, so bear with me with that. But yeah, again, great to see so many awesome people already in here. In fact, we've got Lacey. Excellent to see you. Long time to see, actually. Jean, good to have you in here. I presume Jean, or not, rather than Jean, but could be either, of course. Auntie Liana in Yokohama, good evening. Great to see you. We've got Erin, our wonderful moderator here as always, as well as Sergeant Bilko. Good to see you. Quint Rankid, Dan H. Always good to have Dan H. In the chat. Do appreciate all your contributions, and good to see, yeah, Quint Rankid as well, of course. Ada Void, good morning. Good morning, Arizona. Good to see you. Kerberos Tenji, I believe, coming in from Germany. Great to have you with us. Boom. Did I say boom? I hope I said boom. Yeah, I'm a little bit rusty at the moment. But yes, indeed. David Dentitsu, good to see you. How do I do? I do good. Indeed, smash the like button, like Aaron said. Dan H, how am I feeling? Every time I go on a break, something crazy happens. Now that you mention it, that might be true. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. By the way, summer mode, so air conditioning and doors open and kids being asleep and whatnot, it means that at least until we can turn the air conditioning off during the night, and it's pretty hot here at the moment, I'm going to be a little bit quieter, and it means I'm probably going to turn up the gain and speak closer to the mic. It might actually result in better audio, but it means I'm also going to be kind of, I don't know whether to raise this up, but have this obscuring my mouth. I'd like to at least be able to keep my face, just so you can see what I'm saying. So I'll probably be playing around with the mic a little bit, but that's also why I might be a little bit quieter than usual, just a heads up. Yes, indeed, Atomic Tom, long time no see. Indeed, really want to know my thoughts on the assassination, which I will share. I mean, I'm digesting it just the same as everybody else, and I don't have particular expertise. But I'm following a lot of smart people, and I've seen a lot of views, and I'll share what I think, what my take on it is, certainly. Yoni, great to see you, Yoni. And very cool meeting up the other week, by the way. Kamakura Beach was great, although the waves were not too good today. That's the thing about Kamakura and the Shonan, the southern side of Tokyo, is that, some days you have waves, some days you don't. Every day there's rubbish in the water. Although they do get pretty decent surfing down there. That's where the surf culture of Japan was really became established. Personally, you need a car. You can't go by train, but if you can get out to Chiba, they have steady waves. Or actually, if you want to go to a really nice beach, you want to get all the way down to Shizuoka. But yeah, Kamakura is lovely. But indeed, some days with waves and some not. But glad you got down there. Backup says ahoy. Good to see ahoy, Miyarty. We've got PB on IMAX. Am I on IMAX? Oh, of course, yes, larger video. So yes, that's right. I'm doing, since I have no prepared topics, I thought, why not change the layout? Because I never have technical problems when I change things. It's actually, touch wood so far. A couple of times the video feed did die a few weeks ago, so hopefully it will survive, although I've got a USB camera in waiting if I need it. We've got backup. Wouldn't be nice to hear how Singapore was. Oh, I would love to talk about Singapore. Thank you for reminding me. Keep me honest on that as well. Maybe I'll do a bit of a life update first before I dive into the RB stuff, although I know that's what most people are here for. Which way should I do it around, actually? I think the smart YouTube analytics way is to talk about the RB thing first, perhaps. But yeah, don't let me forget about the what's been going on with me anyway. Tai Nakamura, good to see you. Good to see that you seem to be having a great time. I'm enjoying seeing your occasional updates and stuff on Instagram and so on. Hope you're doing well, sir. ASMR Hiko, yeah. Pretty disappointing ASMR, but yes, that's one way of looking at it, certainly. Yes, indeed, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh was also found passed away. I heard about that. I mean, yep, that's right. Iraq299, good to have you in here as always. Thank you for the confirmation on the audio, by the way, Auntie Liana. Sainted Sir, indeed, 9:36 a.m. in NYC. Good timing at the moment. I guess the summertime daylight saving helps with that. Wingstar, excellent to see you, Wingstar. Great to have you with us. We've got also Odie Jr. Boom, good morning. And good morning to everyone else. As I always say, I just get a thrill seeing just names of people who are here. Even if you're a lurker, you just hit the enter button. It's just nice to see who's there. I do appreciate your keeping me company. I love that we have 21 concurrent viewers at the moment. Even that, you know, I am always over the moon with that. I do appreciate it. Again, I'm just doing this for likes and peanuts, so do remember to like if you like, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, all of that stuff, and let's just dive into it. RB Assassination was not on anyone's bingo card. How could it be on a bingo card? Let's get into it, shall we? There was one fatal shooting in Japan last year. I was talking with an American friend at work on the day that this happened, and he pointed out that, you know, from the perspective of where he was coming from as someone recently arrived in Japan from the United States, even that Chicago mass shooting that happened a week ago, I think, he pointed out there were more fatal shootings in Chicago overall on the same day than there was from that one mass shooting. Just in terms of like how, so, you know, seeing people comment on Twitter, for example, that, oh yes, an American would know as soon as you hear a shot that you're supposed to duck and cover. And, you know, Abe clearly had no instincts for what to do when being shot at. Yeah, one fatal shooting in all of last year in a country of 126 million people. I like that. And you know what? I'm so glad that we're not talking about there needing to be a single door or, you know, and I really hope it's kind of, you know, you could say, well, they should have had better security or whatever. And obviously they should have. And it sounds like as we're finding out more about this, the assassin scoped out other locations and picked this place because he didn't like that there were more police and better security on other locations. But it's something that I like about Japan, and it's something that's familiar to me coming from New Zealand and Australia, that Japan is a place where, you know, I mean, Taro Aso used to go for walks around Shinanomachi, around the Akasaka Gosho, and I've walked by him. I walked by him and the Crown Princess, like the other way on the street, you know. And Aso had like had sort of a minder walking not too far away from him, but he wasn't being protected or anything, and he wasn't hesitating to go out for a walk on a regular street, to the point where we made eye contact a couple of times. I never stopped and said hello to him, although I thought about it, but that sort of close. And with Aiko-san as well, you know, if during election season, the style of Japanese elections, for all the flaws of Japanese democracy, I would say that election times are genuinely where there's kind of, you know, it's kind of old-fashioned that you have politicians everywhere. Their job is to go out and to be seen going out and doing the old-fashioned stump speaking, you know, talking, trying to connect with people, meeting people, being accessible, standing in front of train stations where people can come up and just from a few yards away hear each one. Particularly if you're in Tokyo, you're very lucky that all of the national political leaders are probably going to show up at one of the main train stations near you, and you're going to have a chance to hear the person at close range in person. You know, maybe not have a conversation per se, but they're all very accessible. And, you know, no one even factors in the possibility of assassination. And of course, as this case shows, if you have someone who's determined enough, you know, of course, it could happen in any country to anyone at any time. And there's really, you know, for all of the looking at whether this could have been prevented, I really don't think it could have been prevented by the looks of it. And I hope it doesn't change. I hope it doesn't start, you know, result in creation of barriers. I don't think it will, by the way, but I hope it doesn't lead to a kind of, what you see in other countries, of increasing separation and kind of polarization and this kind of paranoid. When you get a security mentality, it just creates a distance, and with that distance comes a different type of politics. The politics that I don't like, I think, is firmly associated with the fact that people don't feel like they need to be close to people anymore. Now that they're a big deal or whatever, they can stand behind bulletproof glass and only speak at $20,000, hell, even more than that nowadays. Dinners and stuff like that. Um, you know, I hope it doesn't change the character of the democracy here. I guess with Abe, there's two things to talk about in particular. There's the assassination itself and what I think of that and how it happened, and the legacy of Abe and what I think of Abe, which I've been sharing on Twitter. So that's one place you can check that out. And I've given my take on Abe here multiple times, and I'm pretty much going to repeat it, but I think it bears repeating now. I haven't really talked about him for a while, and there's a lot of people talking about his legacy at the moment. So first of all, let's talk about the assassination itself and what the hell happened. Because there are some strange aspects to this. So the first thing is, I think globally, whenever anyone hears and let's face it, whatever you think of Shinzo Abe as a person, Abe Shinzo as a person, and there are, it's very rare to find anyone who says that they really like him. I mean, no doubt there are hardcore LDP supporters who genuinely like him. And there are people who have met him who find good things to say about him. He's obviously smart. Some people say he's actually got quite a good sense of humor and he's quite, affable to get on with in person. But regardless of what you think of him as a person, there's no question he's the longest surviving Japanese prime minister since World War II. And not by default. He was a proactive activist prime minister, and yet he was able to survive in an environment where most prime ministers don't survive for more than a couple of months. And he did change a lot of things about Japanese society in ways that I'll come to when I talk about his legacy that actually probably surprise his critics actually more than anything. So no question, this was by any measure, internationally and domestically, this was a great man, a historic figure. And when you hear that a great politician or historic figure has been shot, you presume that something big is going on. You presume Kennedy assassination. You presume, political intrigue, or was it the Yakuza? Was it Nippon Kaigi? Was it, a coup attempt or something like that? And, and everyone was kind of scrambling for the big story on, how did this, presumably there must be a great big story to go with the falling of such a significant figure. And the saddest thing about this, as someone who, still looks at Abe as a distant sort of a figure, and I'm not particularly, sad or happy or anything about him, as a person. But the sad thing about this incident, just overall, is just how completely senseless it was. And the more that you hear about it, the more that you realize this is actually more, to me, in the characteristic of a lot of the other weird, random sort of crimes that you often hear about coming out of Japan, of just strange people going through isolation and different sorts of stress and whatever, and doing this sort of thing, than it was any sort of grand conspiracy, which is, I think, what people sort of want to be able to, intuitively, you think this must be a great big thing. And it looks like it really wasn't. It's honestly kind of a pathetic person with a weird kind of a grudge. It's interesting, the coverage of the assassination is hit on a few taboo areas, including the topic of religion, which has led to some kind of really weird coverage, which makes it very hard to interpret. There's some things about that I'll cover, but first of all, what happened with the assassination? Put very simply, the emerging narrative is that there was a guy. You know what? I can't even remember. I mean, it is a thing I think I've started to take from a lot of the other sort of famous murders that were done for attention, that I feel intuitively like I don't want to know or try to remember the guy's name, but we'll call him Bozo. We'll call him the assassin. His motivation, as he said to the police, he said it was not political. In fact, he said actually politically he had no problems with Abe at all. He actually kind of agreed with Abe's politics. But it seems that this person was wrapped up in a religious group is the way that the police and the mainstream media are covering it. Some would characterize these groups as cults or sects, but obviously those are emotive terms. So I suppose the neutral term is religious group. I would generally consider, even though these groups are very large and to some people very mainstream in Japan, I would consider a lot of these religious groups to be something close to cults, frankly. But he was involved in a religious group, and as happens with a lot of people in these, particularly, again, I would say fringe religious groups, but with large numbers of members. Like, for example, the main group being discussed is the Unification Church, which are the Moonies, the Korean group. Purportedly has 3 million members in Japan. And remember, there are other groups in Japan. The biggest lay Buddhist organization that everyone knows about claims to have like 20 million members. And, even numbers more conservative say 10 million. But bear in mind, if you're ever in a room of 10 people in Japan, that means that one of them is going to be in that, either actively or having a family member in that, which means that, this is why religion's such a taboo. If you start listing off all of the large, and even calling them cults, you're going to deeply hurt and offend somebody. If you've got a group of more than seriously 5 people, statistics say that you're going to offend somebody deeply if you start ragging off on these religions. So the agreed neutrality is there's also another context to history that comes to how the treatment of religions in Japan and why the police and politics and even the mainstream news media are really reluctant even to say the names of religions or cover them in any way negatively. It kind of comes back to World War II. It comes back to the way that the Japanese state raised up state Shinto in particular and kind of cracked down on, going back hundreds of years in Japan. The Buddhist sects in Japan had their own armies. They were actual political and military forces within Japan, and they had huge amounts of power and influence. And it was one of the sort of decisions of when Japan sort of was taken over gradually by fascists at the start of the 20th century. They decided to sort of use state Shinto as a mechanism to sort of reinforce their own legitimacy, and they basically saw many of these very large lay Buddhist organizations, which themselves had up to 20%, 10% of the population as loyal sort of fee-paying members. And themselves had both political, financial and military power within Japan as potential political rivals to the fascist government. So they did these huge crackdowns on all of these other religious groups in Japan. And actually, and this is something that a lot of those groups point out. They say, oh yeah, we were against the war. We were for peace. A cynic might say that they weren't really for peace. They were for their own power not being taken away by the fascists. But the end result was during GHQ after World War II, a lot of these groups came and said that, yes, we were the true opposition against, all of this madness that was happening in Japan. And GHQ said, well, you need freedom of state, of religion like we have in America. And they put it in the Constitution, which basically gave both a political and a legal protection to any religious group that basically they couldn't be. There was this idea that, if you ever see religious groups being bullied again, that's the start of fascism again. That's what happened with World War II. That's the kind of thing around the taboo, that you don't go there no matter what crazy stuff they might do. They're going to stay tax-free, and undermining their tax-free status will be seen as a kind of a canary in the coal mine that you're about to start, cracking down on religions again in Japan. So they have this kind of sacred tax-free status. And it's given those groups impunity to go back to the same kind of things that they were doing both in the democracy before World War II and even historically, of basically having a lot of political and financial and other sorts of power in Japan. And these religious groups, that collect a lot of money, and it's tax-free, and they fund. And they basically, some of them have their own political parties, which they're not supposed to have. There is supposed to be a separation of religion and state. But these parties, they set up these parties, which are basically like shell companies, which are portrayed as secular parties, but they are completely funded and supported by these specific different religious sects. And for smaller groups, like the one being discussed in the case of Abe, that aren't really, although they have purportedly 3 million members, rather than trying to create their own political party that would just be very small, they decide to throw their weight in between supporting conservative parties, particularly the LDP, and they donate a ton of funds, and they offer their members up to do things like campaigning and so on. And remember as well, these organizations, particularly the more aggressive ones, have businesses, and they do a lot to lock in the lives of their members. And again, if you've got any number of Japanese friends, even in the more mainstream ones, and I'm going to be kind of careful around this, although I have personal opinions, I really don't want to upset anyone bad mouthing religions per se too much, but anyone who's involved in any of the big ones, and you know who the big ones are in Japan, they're mostly Buddhist. Unification Church is sort of more on the fringe, but they're on the list. By the way, I know people. My first encounter with the Unification Church was in New Zealand. There was a sushi shop nearby where I had a girlfriend who got a job there, and the staff sort of came out and said, actually, the shop is owned by that church, and we'd really like to share some pamphlets with you and take you along to our meetings. And all my Japanese friends reacted the same. I thought it was hilarious to hear that there was a Mooney sushi shop in Auckland. And all my Japanese friends said, just get the hell out of there. Don't even show up to work. Don't even quit. Just get the hell out. Do not want to get involved. And I'm sure they're lovely people. I'm sure that there's lots of fine people in that religion. But the people who hear things about these things, these are just things you don't want to get wrapped up in. Case in point, the assassin. The assassin had a mother who was apparently wrapped up in this religion, and he himself apparently was a member of a sect which split off from this church into another religious sect. So the whole family was religious, and as happens when you have religious families, particularly in sort of evangelical and I would say close to cult type religions, and you have family members going into different groups, and those religions themselves operate as businesses that kind of feed off the funds of their members. The mother went bankrupt. The assassin hated this religion, either because it was a rival of the religion that he was in, or he resented what it did to his family. But again, any Japanese person, I know tons of Japanese people that have complicated family situations over religion. Again, it's just another reason you can't bring it up with people. This person claims that the religion ruined his mother and destroyed his family because they were all in different factions of these sects. And he knew that Abe, just like often particularly conservative politicians in other countries will take donations and do appearances and speeches at at events of religious groups in other countries. In Japan, Abe was known to take donations from this particular group, which I've just said what it was. They were the Moonies. Even appearing on videos and whatnot, and he's told the police directly he knew that Abe was friendly with this cult that he hated and had a grudge against, and so he thought that he would take his revenge by targeting Abe. And it wasn't against the LDP, even though it's the LDP that as a whole that has these ties, but he decided to target Abe, and he followed Abe around a bunch of events. But so that's one thread to this, which is basically somebody more or less believe, and it's not clear whether he thought Abe was under the control of this religion. The statements seem that he's not like a Pizzagate believer. He literally does understand that it was more just sort of a friendly relationship with the cult that he just wanted to get at. But it was literally based on hatred of a religious cult, when he himself was in another cult that was a rival of that cult and just wanting to get at that other cult, that had messed with his family, and deciding to target Abe for it. However, there is another dimension to the assassination, which again, I just find, just makes this even more kind of pathetic and pointless, which is, again, the story of the person. The first stories that came out said, well, he's Navy, he's Marine Self-Defense Forces. And then some people said, well, wait a minute, no, it wasn't. The information is that he's 41 years old, and he was in the Navy, the Marine Self-Defense Forces, between when he was 20 and 23, 20 years ago. He did one regular tour under contract, 3 years, and quit. No trouble, no fuss. But it turns out as well that the weapon that was completely homemade. In fact, well, not even 3D printed. It was just made out of parts that apparently you could get from a DIY shop. And he actually had inside his home a bomb making and gun making mini factory. He had made a whole bunch of designs of working bombs and working guns that he even tested, which again shows another kind of common phenomenon with these kind of incidents in Japan, that it appears, that this person, for one, was a kind of a nerd. In fact, the profile of the killer sounds unfortunately so common. You've got a guy here who's learned to make guns and apparently has gotten quite proficient at it, and had these kind of crazy homemade guns that they were bringing out on the news, some with 9 barrels, some with 6 barrels, and apparently they all worked, and he had tested them and test fired them and made sure that they would work for lethality. He had working bombs that he had made. So he was kind of an obsessive nerd about making guns. So it seems to me There are so many cases like this. The one that really stands out to me was that there was an ANA flight in 1999 where an airplane nerd who was obsessive with flight simulators and airplanes apparently discovered a security system flaw on domestic flights for Japanese airliners. And he basically whistle blew. He contacted the aviation authorities and ANA saying that he had found this way that a criminal could smuggle a weapon onto an airplane without being detected, just using the system in the domestic airports. And he was ignored. He expected to get all this praise. Wow, you're the top otaku. You found a problem with our airline security system. And when he was ignored, out of anger and resentment, he decided to show them by carrying out the hijacking that he warned them could happen. And he actually got a knife onto a plane and actually stabbed and killed a pilot, and actually was planning to fly the plane under the Tokyo Bay Bridge, and was talked out of it at the last minute. And, there was a co-pilot who survived, who landed, and this person was arrested. But basically, he wasn't motivated by anything other than to prove that he was like the top otaku at like plane stuff. And that he became so crazy with that. And again, he was single, he was isolated, he was living alone, he had personal problems, and he was a crazy airplane nerd. And at some point, that all just built up into, I'm going to hijack a plane, kill a pilot, try to fly it under the Bay Bridge. And that feels a little bit like this. You've got a guy here who, by all accounts, was a contract worker who sort of quit his job and was unemployed at the time of the thing, wasn't married, had family problems, religion problems, money problems, and was obsessive about making guns, and just decided to do something big. And so he just targeted Abe and he did it, which in the end of the day, for what purpose, right? What was the point that he was making other than more or less just showing off that he could make a gun that worked and could prove that he could do an assassination in a country where there's only one shooting per year anyway? So on the one hand, a part of me wants to say no one cares, and again, there's no talk about whether he was an incel, for example, or anything like that. No, but it does paint a picture again of an isolated, lonely, obsessive, probably reasonably smart person, but just who has all the kinds of stresses and problems that a lot of people have, but just decided, and what honestly looks to me a bit like a narcissistic sort of a way, that he wanted to use it to draw attention to himself by shooting Abe. And, not for a political purpose. Frankly, even if it was based on a grudge about his mum being bankrupted by a cult, even then, what possible connection or purpose does this serve? So it just seems senseless and pathetic, and to that end, the fact that someone died from it, that Abe's family now has to go through this, is just terrible. So just absolutely senseless. And I really hope, like with the New Zealand mass shooting, the best outcome for this, for me, is honestly, in a way, this is to me that nothing changes. I hope that this looks to me like the act of a narcissist. And I think the best thing to do is to basically deny them what appears to be the attention that they want to get. Coming back to the religion thing, however, the thing is that no mainstream media has said the word unification church yet. There are now news outlets which are like tabloids and so on, which are starting to name it, and the tabloids and the conspiracy sites are piling in on this at the moment as well, by the way, as well. And there are some news sites that are starting to talk about why the media and the police won't name the actual religious organizations that are involved. And what they basically say is they're worried that by naming these religious organizations, it could lead to sort of discriminatory or bullying of those religions and their members and so on. And, it could foster, retaliation and bad treatment, which doesn't really make all that much sense to me. But, they're worried about basically it leading to negative, attention towards those religions. So it's kind of to protect the religions that they're not naming them. But by not naming them, they're causing everybody who wants to know what the hell is the religious group that they keep talking about to go onto Twitter and onto the internet. And instead of being told what happened and what the roles were by mainstream news media, they're getting their information from the conspiracy theorists and the people who are the worst sorts of people, who basically the news is trying to protect the religions from, are the ones now providing most of the information, which is leading to crazy, conspiracy stuff going around. I won't comment on. I've seen a couple of the conspiracy theories that came out immediately, and they were honestly self-contradicting and stupid and not worth even mentioning here. But I do think that it's so crazy to me that when you've got 24-hour news coverage, could you imagine, of the assassination of probably the greatest politician in Japan, post-war Japan, everything about the personal details of the life of the person who did this, and yet neither the police nor the news want to even mention that it involved the name of the religion that the assassination was based on a grudge against, that just had a tenuous donation and paid speaker relationship with Abe over. So just stupid and pointless. But that's the thing. The whole thing about this is the guy doesn't look like he was crazy. I mean, he was a nutter in his own sort of a way, but clearly not like insane. There's a question whether this would draw the death penalty. The death penalty in Japan is not typically available for anything more than multiple murders. However, it was given in a case where, kind of a similar case in some ways, there was a case about 10 years ago now, maybe like 2017 or something, where the mayor of Nagasaki was murdered by someone who had a grudge over like parking tickets or something. I mean, again, almost as pathetic as this. They gave a death penalty for that because they thought it was because it had a political and a social dimension. They thought that added to the gravity of it. I personally think that there are heinous single murders that, well, one, I'm against the death penalty, full stop, actually. But if you have it, and I think it's also correct that the threshold is very high in Japan. But if you ever consider lowering that for a single murder, I don't think the fact that the person murdered was famous is a reason to lower the death penalty threshold. I think there are particularly heinous single murder cases that might justify that. That have aggregated factors, but I don't think this reaches that. I mean, I think this person should never be allowed out of jail. But there's the question. That said, given that the person who assassinated the Nagasaki mayor over a parking ticket dispute did get the death penalty, it does seem highly probable that prosecutors here will go after the death penalty in this case. And this guy's probably going to get it. I mean, he's not even arguing, he's not contesting. He handed himself in straight away. I think that's wrong, but that's the law of the land, and that's for the Japanese people to decide. So I guess that's the first part of this. The first part is what happened with the assassination. The other things I'm going to talk about tonight are the legacy of Abe, the election, and talk a bit about what's been going on with me. But before I do that, why don't I jump into the comments, because I've just been talking for half an hour, and I'd like to hear what all of you think and get your comments, which may indeed take up a lot of this. So, let's try to find out where I left off just before. Dan H, how are Daiso and farms keeping prices low and surviving? Also, how's my throat? Is all the phlegm out? It's weird. I never had phlegm with it. I had like uni. I don't even know the word for uni, but it's not phlegm. It's just like white stuff just stuck to my throat and just raging pain. So much pain I could not eat, drink, or sleep for 3 or 4 days, and I had a 39.6 degree fever. And it was not fun. And honestly, even now, it's still not cleared up. I think just not being sick for 2 years, my body just couldn't really fight it as well. So it was horrible, and it's still there. But it was just purely the throat. So I'm doing better, but still not fully cleared up yet. But thank you for asking. I feel elderly talking about my my medical stuff. But yeah. By the way, do what everyone else is doing. If you want to get my attention, you just do what Andrea Moboy just did. Just say my name. It will highlight an orange, and I will focus on the orange flashing comments. Hi, watching the Wimbledon men's final. You enjoy that, Andrea Moboy? Drink, Hiko Simon? I don't know what you mean by that. I don't drink alcohol very much. I do a little bit. I don't not drink, but I'm drinking water right now, and I suspect that's not the question, but yeah. Lacey have found the immediate reporting of the assassin's name and photo quite different to, say, the terrorist attack, where it was intentionally not said. I think the difference was in New Zealand was that that was a more extreme case where, I mean, the person, you talk about the level of narcissist, the New Zealand case, and that Australian who moved to New Zealand, in order to carry out, I mean, the level of narcissism of the New Zealand attack, the manifesto, the live streaming, it was so patently for the purpose of becoming famous, which appears to be the case here, but isn't as obvious. In New Zealand, that seemed to be the purpose, was to get famous. And for that, I actually agree that the extraordinary approach of not saying his name and denying him that was correct. I think in Japan, It was more that this is just a person who's just kind of had a bit of a falling down, kind of crappy life and has just decided to screw you guys. I'm going to show you that I'm the best, I'm awesome at making guns and I can do this. See, I have power after all. I think it was more that sort of a thing rather than seeking to become famous and change history or something like that, like the New Zealand case. So I think there is a distinction there. But that said, I have no interest personally in remembering the person's name. Savas Musician, good to see you. Japan, definitely tax-free. Religious groups in Japan are tax-free, and it's a thing. It's actually, and a lot of them are extremely wealthy because they fold all their businesses into the religion, and they use it as a way to dodge tax, and they protect their position by funneling their tax-free money into political donations to ensure that no one's ever going to make sure they get taxed. Which is why, honestly, my personal opinion on this is that religions should be taxed like absolutely everything else. I'm okay with having protection of religions, but I don't think that necessitates tax-free status. And I think the way that religions, particularly in Japan, abuse their tax-free status to use that to directly funnel money into manipulating politics. And I'm not talking about this specific case or issue. I'm talking about in general and many religious groups much more influential than this one. I think that's messed up, and I think they should be taxed just like any other organization pays taxes, but and free to practice. Dan H, remember the Unification Church had a very close relationship with the crazy far-right Ryoichi Sasakawa. I didn't know that, but that doesn't surprise me. I mean, and again, as I understand, the Moonies will basically, back any horse that only has right legs. They're extreme. I mean, and it's funny. And while they are extreme, I mean, today, in what I'm pretty sure was a breach of the electioneering, campaign laws, my post box had 4 Happy Science flyers in it today. They're not allowed to do any campaigning today, and yet those were new flyers. That party, you talk about, the craziness of the fringe and extreme right-wing views. I mean, they make they make these people look, kind of moderate by comparison. So yeah, there's a lot of extreme views out there, but and yes, a lot of religions tie in with it. This is crazy. Razo, good to see you. I saw that there was a stupid 4chan meme going around linking the creator of Metal Gear Solid with the Assassination, which again, just also disappointing how many people just use these kind of opportunities to, kind of draw attention to themselves, trying to do stuff like that. But yes, indeed, that happened. Believe in yourself. Good evening. Good to see you. Aaron asks, didn't Abe's father survive an assassination attempt back in the day? Well, back in the day when his father, by the way, Abe's father is also a complicated matter. I think his biological father was Kishi, who was like a post-war prime minister. Back in those days, everybody had an assassination attempt at some time. So yeah, it's definitely mellowed out a lot. But there you go. Scrolling down. Hope I haven't missed anybody. But Quint Rankin, clearly not insane. Does Japan distinguish between legally and clinically insane? I don't know. I mean, you can certainly have insanity as a defense, but it's very seldom. It's not often recognized. I'd say the threshold for it, obviously, criminal insanity as a defense in a criminal trial is different. Even by each state in America, the thresholds and criteria are different. I don't know exactly what the criteria in Japan is. I've seen people try to claim it, but it's a pretty rare to get off a murder case anyway. So it exists. I think being clinically insane may qualify you for criminally insane, but I again, the person seems pretty lucid. So hard to believe that would get them off. Tim the Asian Ink, boom, good to have you with us. Kubris Tenshi was really pissed at German media covering the assassination, simply saying that a young man committed the crime. 41 is not a young man. Well, kind of is in the aging society here, and he looked younger than 41 to me, but yeah. Off to bed, says Lysander 45. Good chat so far. Glad that you could join. Kubris Tenshi in Germany, if you're a Christian, not only do you pay regular taxes, you pay 10% of your gross income to the church, and they receive it tax-free. That's exactly how a lot of religions work in Japan, actually, as well, that you pay tithes to the religions. In fact, that's exactly what the person in this case was complaining about, was that his mother was paying all of this money to her church, who was paying money to Abe and not paying taxes. Believe in yourself. It does provide an effective counterbalance to families who would normally be untouchable, but does this have a bit of a feel to it? I suspect I'm coming in on that comment not knowing what exactly you're talking about. Families that would normally be untouchable. I don't know if you're talking about the general shielding and protection of religions. There's probably an element of that, but yeah, I'm not sure. So anyway, Abe's legacy, what is it? And I think the big thing as well, the headline I'm expecting to see tomorrow in most places is that LDP wins by a landslide. No doubt a result of the public grief and reaction to the Abe assassination. That's a coherent sounding headline. It's the one I expect most people to read the situation as. Truth is, LDP was a non-election to begin with. There's no coherent opposition. The main opposition party was already in free fall collapse. There was no clear policy debate about anything. LDP was sleepwalking to a landslide. Already the vote results today show that their turnout was like 1% more than it was from the last election 3 years ago. So it doesn't really honestly appear that, to the extent that the LDP was already winning by a landslide, while it looks like a nice narrative to say that somehow this caused a turnaround or somehow benefited the LDP, I think you'll find that it will have almost no practical bearing on the outcome of the election, just to the extent that it was already a rock solid, safe election. I don't think that it was going to make somebody who was not going to vote for the LDP change their mind to vote for the LDP. Clearly, it hasn't motivated people to vote who weren't planning to vote. And the thing about Abe himself is that he was a very polarizing figure. Do you think if there was an assassination, for example, of a figure like Trump, do you think that would cause a lot of Democrats to suddenly vote Republican? Or cause more people to turn out to vote? It might in America. Honestly, America is so crazy to me at the moment. I trying to even use parallels there, I think, is probably redundant. But you get it. You get the idea that the Abe assassination, and he is seen by many people in Japan, as a kind of Trump, and we'll come to this when we talk about his legacy in a moment. But the idea that this changed the election, the outcome of this election, which is going to be, by the way, devastating for the opposition and is hugely empowering for the LDP, I don't think it had any bearing at all, and I don't think it's actually going to have much bearing on the future. Some people might suggest this might embolden people who supported his agenda, which is pretty proactive of constitutional reform and so on. But fact is, Kishida, the current prime minister, doesn't agree with Abe in terms of he's not as pro constitutional reform. I think Abe wanted to stimulate discussion of topics, and those discussions may be advanced slightly in his name, but I don't think that the public mood is going to change. I really think it's going to have very, very little immediate impact on politics, or including the election that's happening today. In terms of the legacy of Abe, I've shared it before. Indeed, Erin talking about Aki, Abe's wife. Terrible situation for anybody connected with the man, of course, but it's particularly the wife. In terms of Abe and his, and his legacy and what it is, and people are already talking about this. He was already in a state of quasi-retirement anyway. I've been doing Tokyo Tonight, for years now, and I've been talking in real time. I'm sure you can go back. I'm pretty sure you could probably find me talking about this. I think I've been absolutely consistent on this. I remember, going all the way back actually to 2002, when he was in Koizumi's cabinet and when Koizumi made him his successor. And he was sort of seen as a hawk and a right-wing nationalist based on, the opinions that he expressed. People basically, he was sort of like, I think, there is an industry of academics and journalists and whatever who are in Japan, which is frankly kind of a slow news country at the best of times. That's what I like about the place, is that it's a slow news country. And I think there's a lot of people who feel the need to justify their positions and their jobs. They're trying to get included, they're trying to get a decent headline in the international papers that they represent, or, trying to get attention for the papers that they're publishing overseas outside of Japan. I think there's a natural incentive for people to talk up the significance and importance of certain people. And I think people rightly pointed out that Abe was going to be a significant figure, but I think the way that they kind of hyped him up was a bit of a WWE promo reel, where they pointed out the son of a forgiven war criminal who, I can't remember exactly. I think his father was a finance minister during World War II and was involved with munitions production. So kind of, people saying that he's sort of the the progeny of a forgiven war criminal, and someone who expresses views that Japan should militarize and have nuclear weapons, and change the constitution, abolish the peace constitution, and wants to go to war with everybody. And would basically, whenever there was a debate about the constitution or about defense or whatever, and his family background and everything like that, there was enough statements and enough stuff there to put together that basically he was characterized during his first tenure, and even when he came back in his second tenure, as the coming, and this was before Trump and before Duterte and before the rise of these right-wing populist sort of leaders coming up all over the region. He was portrayed in a lot of mainstream Western media as a dangerous populist right-wing nationalist. Literally, there are people going all the way up to, but not quite saying that he was going to be a Japanese Hitler. That he was a powerful, politically powerful, and had the potential to actually achieve the aims of sort of the revisionists and the war crime, the World War II war crime deniers and so on, and would bring out all those things that people who are paranoid about Japan and are suspicious of Japan believe that Abe was like a member of the shady Nippon Kaigi organization, and probably having Yakuza ties and all these things, all these sorts of innuendo that got tossed out about him, that basically everything that you are paranoid and suspicious of Japan about, Abe is going to make happen. And it wasn't just the foreign media that did that. Of course, there are a lot of the left, a lot of far left in Japan absolutely believed all of this and hated this. But I think what happened was a lot of the Western academics and media in Japan spends a lot of time talking with far left in Japan, and they absorb a lot of those views. And the view of Japan that they transmit of Japan and of people like Abe reflected views that within Japan were pretty fringe and pretty extremist anti-Abe views. But those views, which were broadcast in a lot of mainstream large publications, clearly affected the way that Abe was sort of treated as a pariah. He was treated as a pariah by the Obama administration. He was treated as a pariah. China wouldn't meet with him. The Korean, he was reviled in Korea. Couldn't get anyone to meet him. Was sort of the state visits were sort of cut short and whatever, and it was affected by the sort of perception that he was this sort of extremist. And was it all made up? Well, not exactly. I think a lot of it was dramatically exaggerated. And again, I think they were just playing him up like a pro wrestling heel a little bit, to have an interesting story, to sort of get their stories published. But that said, I mean, he has statements. He's on the record. He doesn't mind going on TV and saying, yeah, sure, why shouldn't we have a normal military like every other country? Why should Japan still be subject to a punishment constitution from World War II 70 years later? Why can't we change that? I would like Japan to be a normal country. This is what he would say. When you talk about beautiful Japan, he'd talk about it as normalization. But of course, people who never want the constitution changed see that as being, literally a militarist sort of revival of Hideki Tojo. And that was kind of the view a lot of people were taking. So, but he was on the record. What I found most interesting, and here is my take on his legacy, he survived because he was able to compartmentalize and separate what he personally thought and what his personal beliefs and ideology was from the job of being a good prime minister and everything that entailed. And basically, you have to remember, he was born into a political aristocracy. He was raised to be a politician. And part of being a politician, for someone who's raised to be a politician, is not to be a populist that goes out and says crazy things and does crazy things, to win as many votes as possible. It's somebody who expresses what their views are, but is willing to sit down in a room with people with different views and compromise and actually do business to take wins and losses and compromise to be able to have good government. And he was an old-fashioned politician like that, and he was a good politician. And the fact that his track record so diametrically almost opposes his ideology, it's worth pointing out his track record as a prime minister. If you forget everything and it was so funny how even in the middle of the moment, it was contradictory. I remember him as prime minister going on TV, and they were talking about the demographic problems of Japan and asking, is it, isn't it unavoidable that we're going to have more immigration in Japan in order to, stop the country collapsing under the demographic challenge? And he said on TV, I remember saying that, no, I don't think we need any more immigration. I think we can get through this without changing the population makeup of Japan. Basically, directly saying I'm against immigration. Yet while he was prime minister, anyone who's come to Japan or lived in Japan knows, one, it became dramatically easy to get visas for dramatically longer periods of time. The default working visas became, instead of one year, they became 3 yearly for most people. It became much easier to get permanent residence. The number of foreigners living in Japan more than tripled, which is to say, he didn't interfere with the policymakers that recognized that immigration was important for Japan and got on and did that. In fact, he funded and enabled it while he continued to express a personal ideology that he would prefer that Japan just stayed pure and homogenous. He was pragmatic enough to recognize that he took the best advice from the experts that Japan needs this and oversaw the implementation of a dramatic, radical liberalization of immigration. He was a vocal, some people actually started to say, when he was promoting womenomics and promoting women, frankly, who at times were not experienced enough or qualified, but rapidly promoting women in cabinet, and again declaring policy agendas of promoting women in roles in society, and responding to concerns about things like funding for daycare and wait lists and so on. He had an almost sort of left-wing social agenda in terms of what he said and executed around that, even though he was reviled by feminists, and was seen as the very worst instincts of the far-right conservative sort of LDP. His track record on a lot of things, on free trade. He was an economic nationalist. He was an advocate of things like the TPP. On allowing imports of everything, including the butter that I wanted, even though, of course, he represented the voters, the farmers that were most opposed to it. So the fact that he had all of these, his track record in the end of the day, and his ability to be able to work with factions that he disagreed with and opposed with. The fact also, the other thing that I think is the biggest, that says the most about Abe, is that he had a majority in parliament, and both the first time since World War II that ever he was so popular, or his government was so popular, that it had a 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament, and he could have revised the constitution the way that he talked about always doing. And he, for years, and it wasn't even a narrow window, it was for years, he had the window to do that, and he didn't do it. And he didn't do it because even though he wanted to do it, and he arguably even had the power to force it through, that he could have abolished Article 9 of the Constitution, he recognized that he didn't have the popular public support for it, and it wasn't the right timing. So he kept his powder dry on it. And again, that shows to me someone who has strident views that I disagree with, but at the same time is capable of reading the room and making the right call. And I think those kind of politicians are disappearing. I think, unfortunately, not just in America, I think actually in UK, in Australia, in a lot of countries right now, a lot of politicians have kind of cracked the code. They've figured out that if you say crazy things, and then you don't go and compromise after there's this kind of backlash against old-fashioned politics at the moment, where people think that politicians say that they're going to do something, and then they go into Congress and they compromise, which means that they lied to you. They told you they were going to do this, and then they didn't do it, and they're all liars. And I'm different because I'm going to do what I say. I'm going to do every single crazy thing that I say, and I'm never going to compromise. Politics always works by basically disappointing everybody equally. And there's been this kind of thing happen with populist politics where people have kind of discovered that, oh, if I never compromise, if I never cross the aisle, if I take extreme views and I only do extreme stuff, I'm going to get more votes. And unfortunately, that's causing chaos. It's causing basically democracy to cease functioning because it's no longer based on compromise and pragmatism. It's based on hyping up extreme positions and being seen to deliver on it. I think Trump absolutely he was one, but not the only innovator on finding this formula for success. And I don't think Abe was anything like that. Abe was an old school, traditional backroom dealing, effective politician who was willing to subvert his own agenda to do the right thing in the end of the day for the country. and he still stayed persistent all the way up to the end. He said that Japan should recognize Taiwan. Japan should consider having a full defense capability and so on. And I think that these are actually normally reasonable things to discuss, although in Japan it is beyond the pale to discuss, and they are taboo topics. And he is still hated particularly by the far left, for even being willing to discuss these things. But I still like the fact that he had the ability to do all of the crazy things that everyone said he was going to do, and he didn't do it because he recognized it wasn't the right time. And I think that's his legacy, and that's the type of politician that, honestly, we need to have kind of come back in the type of politics that I think the world really needs to go back to right now. And he exemplified it, but it's disappearing. I think we're getting into this age of crazy populist politics, which is not what he represented. He represented the opposite of that, and that, I think, is the best legacy that he had. I personally didn't like the guy. I wouldn't have voted for him. I disagreed with a lot of his opinions, but I respected the fact that his track record didn't represent the things that he said. He represented someone, and that the reason that he kept getting reelected and that he was so popular was not that everyone thought that Japan should have nuclear weapons and should abolish immigration. It was because they recognized that if they made him prime minister, he was going to, run the boat relatively well. And again, you can get into disagreeing with his economic program and specific policies, but overall, he was an effective, good prime minister, which is such a rare thing in Japan and frankly anywhere nowadays. So that was his legacy, if you ask me. Didn't like him, but I respected him. And the reason he's going to be remembered as a great prime minister is because he was able to do that. He was able to compartmentalize what he passionately and eloquently was able to express his beliefs as, from what he recognized was the right thing to do at the time when he was prime minister. Final thing, I've got a couple of minutes left. I realize I've just talked nonstop for this whole thing. Some people wanted to hear about Singapore, and I guess I should mention what's been happening with me. So yeah, I went to Singapore. Singapore was awesome. The thing about Japan at the moment is that to enter Japan, even if you're a Japanese citizen, even if you're re-entering Japan, you need a clear PCR test to be able to come back into Japan. So for me, this was a work trip. It was my first time traveling, and honestly, second time outside of the Yamanote line in 2 years. I've just been in this room working from home, not meeting anybody face-to-face for 2 years. And all of a sudden, I fly down to Singapore. I'm on an airplane. I'm in Singapore meeting dozens of people. Singapore was great. Singapore actually is a place to go to from Japan. People still wear masks. There's still sanitizer everywhere. It felt very familiar like Japan. There was no awkwardness wearing masks at work or in meetings, which I appreciated. So it was good. It was great to actually just meet people in person. I really miss that. I really hope that we get back to a point soon where things can normalize, where I can do a tweet up and meet all of you in person at some point. But yeah, it was a really wonderful week to get to hang out with people. I decided to be careful, and while some people from places like Australia and America, where the disease has really just passed through everyone, they were going out to karaoke and doing some more things like going out drinking, and I was like, well, I was worried about failing my PCR test and not being able to get back into Japan. So I said, look, I'm normally the karaoke king, but not right now. But I will. I'll go out for dinner and go out for some initial drinks, and then I'll excuse myself gracefully. And I went for some runs. You can see on Instagram, I went running around Marina Bay. Wonderful, just beautiful scenery and a great running course. And I did things that I've never done in Singapore because I sort of went off and tried to figure out, okay, what's some stuff I can do on my own that's sort of healthy and low risk in terms of coronavirus. And it just enhanced the trip. I had great food. I got to meet lots of people. I had a great, and then when we had to go back to Japan, when we all left, and there were people from many countries there, 3 people from Japan, and everyone got tested. It turns out of the 3 people from Japan, I was the only one who tested negative, and the other 2 people came up positive on their coronavirus tests, and they had to cancel their flights, and they had to extend their hotels. So that was nuts. I thought I was the lucky one that I was able to fly back on schedule. But of course, situation at home is that although I and my wife are triple vaccinated, my son is young and he didn't want to get vaccinated, and we sort of debated it. I would have preferred he got vaccinated, honestly, but decided we wouldn't force him into it yet. So, but basically because of that, even though I was tested clear, we agreed that I should stay in a hotel near work for a week, just do an extra week, an extra layer of protection just to make sure there's no risk I'm bringing anything home. So I did that. So I went and stayed in a hotel for a week in Meguro. And this is why I missed the show last week, because I was doing the extra quarantine, even though I was safe to come back from Singapore. And again, that was great. I said it was kind of a quiet holiday. I was, still going into the office, and I was going for runs and so on. And I was on the final day ready when I could finally go home after 2 weeks. And I started to get a sore throat and develop a fever on the final day when I was going to check out of the hotel. And I went up and I got a PCR test, which was negative, but they said, yeah, you've either got coronavirus or tonsillitis. And it seems pretty, they confirmed it more or less as tonsillitis. I wish I'd had those things out when I was a kid. It was, again, first time I've been sick in years now. So, the result of that was, I think it took a while for the medicine to work. I had 3 or 4 really miserable days. I had to keep extending the hotel, and it wasn't as fun being in the hotel anymore. When you're sick in a hotel, it's not fun at all. It's kind of fun when you're free to go out and do what you like, go running and stuff like that. But yeah, after another 7 days, 14 days in a hotel in Tokyo, I could finally go home the other day. So I've been home for about 2 or 3 days now. Still croaky, still not fully recovered, still taking medicine, actually. Yeah, I'm feeling a lot better. But as Dan H pointed out, it seems that whenever I'm away from the show, something dramatic happens. So I'll try not to do that too often. There is actually another one of these coming up. I will be going in September. I'll be traveling to New Zealand for my grandmother's memorial. And the week after that, there'll be another meeting in Singapore, after which I'll have another, all going well, if I'm clear and able to get back into Japan, there'll then be another week at another hotel in Meguro. So that'll be another 3 weeks in September. So I'll see what I can figure out with the show. It's honestly not very convenient to set this up, if you're in a hotel sort of a situation. But I might see if I can do something next time. But that's a couple of months away. Hopefully nothing too dramatic happens. Hopefully there's no... Yeah, now actually that makes me nervous about what might happen if I go away again. But for now, I am back and I've got nothing else to do most of the rest of the time. It was wonderful to travel and to see people, and Singapore was great, and I'm looking forward to going back there. I'm also really looking forward to going to New Zealand and seeing my dad's house. Hopefully showing you all a little bit of that as well as getting done. We couldn't do my grandmother's funeral because New Zealand was completely locked down at the time, but it's 1 year since that now, and it's a good timing for the memorial, and it'll be a good chance to see family. It'll be Christchurch in the middle of winter, so it's going to be cold. But I am looking forward to getting back to New Zealand as well for a trip. So yeah, lots to look forward to. I am doing good. I'm doing better. I'm going to do a last sweep through the topics and through the comments, and then I'm going to say goodbye. But that's pretty much what's been happening. Oh, I didn't even talk about the election result. But the election result, as I pointed out, I'll just quickly summarize. LDP landslide. The Constitutional Democratic Party, the main largest opposition party, is losing seats dramatically just because they are still infighting. They have no coherent manifesto or policies to really oppose with, and people are sort of fed up with them at the moment. And I think, you know what? I think it's a good thing for them to lose and get small, because with all the infighting and drama that they have within the party, I think maybe getting small is the right thing. Maybe clear out some of the old guard and get a smaller group that can actually put together an electable, coherent sort of group is a good idea. The second biggest opposition party is the Osakan Ishinokai, which is basically sort of a regional populist Osakan sort of center-right party. But you know what? They actually are better organized than the National Constitutional Democrats. And I don't know, I think maybe the problem with the Democrats is that they're a mix of populist right-wing people as well as hardcore old school sort of, 1980s style socialists and so on, all trying to agree on stuff in the same party, and they can't agree on anything. I really think the right formula for the opposition is to recognize that voters are more interested in center-right parties right now than they are in 1980s style socialist parties. They're not electable. So my hope is that there'll be some consolidation in the opposition, and that they'll clean out those people, or at least or at least they'll separate out into different parties, and there'll be a coherent block of an electable alternative to the LDP, which emerges from that. The Reiwa Shinsengumi sort of social, sort of, I guess you'd call it sort of social democrats, kind of socially responsible type party. They've got a couple of seats, which is, I think, good to see. I think they've got a role to play. The communists are as solid as they always are, on about 10%, and they're going to keep their seats. They're the most coherent and credible, I think, left-wing party left in Japan at the moment. The Socialist Party looks like they might not even get any seats this time. They've got one person left at the moment, but again, I think their ideology is dead, and I think that they're kind of holding up consolidation of the opposition, so I think that's actually a good thing. And then there's the NHK party, which also I hope is wiped out by this election, just because although they get votes for, based on their central platform of not wanting to pay the broadcast fee, they also advocate eugenics and war and all kinds of stupid stuff, and they should not be in parliament. So hopefully, I'm hoping in a way that while the opposition is going to get destroyed tonight, I think it might be the destruction that they need, It might be that brush fire that, cleans out the undergrowth in the forest and lets it grow back better. I think the opposition desperately needs that. They weren't even contesting this election before it started. Frankly, it felt a bit, I remember the afternoon after the assassination, I went outside from work and it was near the train station and there was one person campaigning in front of the station who was still doing the old stumping. And even I was looking at him like, dude, that doesn't seem right. Nobody should be stumping right now. But frankly, there wasn't much really going on even before that. But it definitely did put a chill on it. But I don't think it changed the outcome. So that's what's happening with the election tonight. Final sweep through. Let me go through. We've got Tawaiwai. Good to see you. Abenomics, pretty much a big ho-hum indeed. Well, yeah, didn't see much long-lasting effects of his 3 arrows. Boosting internal bound tourism was a good success. There's another thing that he did. He boosted the internal tourism. I mean, yeah, I think that was a success. Look, the Abenomics, you wouldn't say it fixed anything, but it's something that a lot of other central banks took lessons from and applied. So you could deserve some credit, at least for having some innovation, even if it wasn't final or effective. But again, I just showed, I think he was, no one's figured out the solutions for deflation that he was trying to solve. But, it showed that he was more effective than anyone else who tried tackling it. Dan H, on side note, what are your thoughts about Hanumura win with antitrust case against Kakaku? Oh, yeah. Given your expertise, what are the effect on tech companies like YouTube with algorithms in Japan? Wow, that's a big topic. I thought it was BS. I thought it was complete utter BS. By the way, I'm trying to remember the details of the case, but I remember when it came out, and there is discussion of it where I work. It's a little bit close to the bone, honestly, given my current job, although it doesn't directly affect what I do, but there was debate about it. To me, my superficial reaction is that the idea, this whole idea of, that algorithms, that choice algorithms, are inherently subject to competition law in that way, I think is overreaching. But yeah, that it actually, Dan H, can you tweet me about that? Because I feel like that's something I should actually say some more about, although I don't have more of an opinion on that tonight, other than I thought it was overreaching, and it reflected to me that the court didn't really understand the technology appropriately. But yeah, that was a fascinating case. Thank you for bringing it up. Believe in yourself. Brilliance. Believe in yourself. The slow realization that the grand show is for the people all the time. You recognize that he considered all information available to him. I think you're talking about Abe. I'm not sure. PB, he was good at reading things internationally as well. I agree. He was a strong proponent of democratic alliance of sorts to counter China way back in 2008 that led to the Quad. You're absolutely right. And here's the thing. And he could have done that more effectively if everyone wasn't like being so guarded and worried about him instead of China because of all the hysterical news coverage of him that was characterizing the way that he was being perceived by other world leaders. Other world leaders took a long time for them to trust him because of the hysterical and again, frankly, kind of self-promoting kind of coverage by people, again, trying to get a headline for Japan by saying that Abe is going to be the next Hitler. And that spooked a lot of people out of sight of Japan. And you're right. I think it undermined the very good foreign policy ideas that he was a proponent of multilateralism, which is what Trump completely did the reverse of, by the way. Obama could have got a lot more done if he had realized that he actually had an ally when Abe was there. And again, just pragmatic. Atomic Tom, maybe you can bring up your mic and webcam. Maybe you can bring your mic and webcam on the next trip. Yeah, it's a lot to carry around in a suitcase. But I think actually the iPhone is surprisingly good. And I want to get the next iPhone, so maybe that'll help. Maybe I'll just get a good lav mic or something like that. This show is the glue that unites many opinions in a way that fosters open discussion and growth. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Believe in yourself. That's what I try to do, even internally within myself. Bob Turner, is Japan going to run out of gas? Do you mean like literally or do you mean like metaphorically? I don't think either. I'm a big hoper that Japan is going to be able to convert its economy, but before to not needing gas anymore before it runs out of gas, if you mean real gas. And in terms of, is it going to run out of energy? No, it's going to chug along, I think. But that's just my opinion. And yes, you're talking of Abe, right? I got through all the comments. It's 10 minutes over. It's been a big couple of weeks. It's been a big couple of days. Senseless, stupid, pointless thing that happened. And as usual, looking out for. I'm expecting to see a lot of bad takes on this from the election and so on tomorrow. Again, people are so Abe is polarizing. A lot of people will dislike him so much they won't like any sort of a balanced take on him. But I think there is a balanced take to be made, which is that he's an old-fashioned politician who's able to, you know, reach across the aisle, and that's just such an increasingly rare and so desperately needed thing in the world today. That's if there's a positive legacy I think to ascribe to him, I think it's that. And he was an influential man who just went in a senseless and pointless way. And I really hope that it doesn't result in anything both small in terms of, I hope this doesn't mean they put politicians behind, bulletproof glass all over the place, which I don't think it will, but I hope it doesn't result in anything small like that, or big in terms of, I don't think it should affect policy debate or anything like that. I think it won't affect the election, but I hope that this election does cause the opposition to finally get its act together. I hope it shakes them up and cleans out the people who are sort of obstructing things from getting better. And I hope we get some way in the direction of some sort of normal political system where governments can occasionally change. That's what this all has to move towards. And I hope that happens as a result of the opposition just being so completely destroyed in this election. It's not a healthy situation. It hasn't been for a long time. And I hope that this helps fix that. So, yeah, that is the show. Remember, please like if you like, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Follow me on Twitter if you want to follow me through the week, and I'll be back here next week, 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time, like I am every week. Stay safe, take care of each other, don't get the Rona, and boom, peace. Have a good one.